Many people believe that you need to have hundreds and thousands of dollars or millions of dollars sitting in your bank account if you plan to buy a business. But that's not true, my friend, because that's not how the Wall Street people or the rich people do the business deals or the business transaction. In fact, most of the business acquisitions and the high volume business transactions happen in today's market. They happen with a little to no out-of-pocket cash from the investor. So today in this video, I'm going to explain you how these business transactions work, how business acquisition deals are structured, and the payment methods the smart buyers in the today's market use to reduce the risk in the business without losing a dime from their own pocket. Hi, I'm Raheel, Sheikh, and at Acquisitions LLC, I have helped and assisted multiple businesses and investors in structuring, acquiring, and exiting their businesses. And one of the biggest misconception I always happen to see is that the investors believe, or individuals believe, especially the first time business owners, that you need to have all the hard cash in your bank account before you actually start going and hunting for the business, or if you plan to buy or acquire a business. That's not always true, because deal structure matters. So let's understand what is the deal structuring. So in the acquisition world, deal structuring is basically how the financing of the business is going to happen and what kind of money transactions are being structured and agreed between the buyer and the seller. Another word of these is called also the creative financings, which is like you need to arrange the finances in a creative way where you structure a deal in your favor and at the same time in the seller's favor as well. So remember, my friend, not all the payments in any business acquisitions happens at once. So it's not like you are going and paying all the hard cash on the table and you are acquiring a business. Instead, the deals are often layered. Typical components of the deal layering or a deal structuring is that you pay a certain amount as a down payment, then you may offer a seller financing, you may include the asset-based payments, or you can also do a assets transfer payments. Because these kind of structures, they reduces the risks on the buyer side because he is just taking over the business and the liability for somebody else. So one important factor whenever you are considering in buying an existing business, that the buying a business or a business acquisition is not always about the payment amount. It's about the terms of the payment. So for example, two buyers may pay the same amount for the same business, but the different terms. So with the more favorable terms, one buyer may reduce the risk while the second buyer may increase the risk of the business. So technically, how does this work is like my payments, your terms, or your payments, my terms. So whatever works between the buyer and the seller. Either you accept the payments, but you make the seller accept your terms, or you accept the payment, or vice versa. So number one protocol in the deal structuring is, of course, the down payment. Most common, most favorable for both buyers and sellers. That when you sign up the deal, you just offer one particular amount as a down payment of the business, and that down payment can typically last between 10% to 40% of the sale price, because that shows the commitment from the buyer side that he's a serious guy, he's gonna move forward with the deal on a serious term. But here, whenever you are deciding about the down payment, remember one very critical strategy. For example, if your total budget is $100,000 and you are talking about you are negotiating a deal of, let's say, a $300,000 to $500,000 deal, never ever put the entire of your budget amount as a down payment. You always need to keep a buffer for the working capitals or some contingencies or some surprise expenses when you take over the deal, right? So if you have an entire budget of 100 grand in your pocket and in your bank, then you may offer somewhere around $40,000 to $50,000 as a down payment, and the balance amount you're gonna keep it for your operating expenses. Because remember, in the acquisitions world, many of the acquisitions fail not because of the bad business or a bad transaction, but they fail because of the low operating expenses or operating capital left to the buyer because he has put all of his money into the deal. So once you put a down payment, the first thing which you're gonna go and talk to the seller about is the seller financing. So what does a seller financing means? Which means that there is a seller who is running a business profitable, you're going to take over the business, but you are not putting a entire 100% payment on the table today. You're gonna pay like 20% as a down payment, and the balance 80% is gonna be seller finance, which means the seller becomes the bank for you, and he accepts on the terms that over the next, let's say 3, 5 or 10 years, you're gonna pay him a certain amount while taking over the business, and you're gonna pay that amount from the business earnings and the business profit. So basically you take over the business, you start making money on the day one, and you agree to pay a certain amount, fixed amount, on a month-to-month basis to the seller, and that's called a seller financing. Why do the seller agrees to that? Because they are just walking clean from the business. Their liabilities are finished. They don't have to work every day 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 or whatever the case may be, just to earn their income to pay the bills. They are sitting home, maybe they are retiring, maybe they are relaxing, or they are changing the business or changing the state or whatever the case may be. But now they're just gonna sit and enjoy the amounts coming from you while you take care of their businesses month on month. And here one very key factor which you need to consider. Most of the times people believe that if the seller is not agreeing to the seller financing, maybe it's a bad deal. Not necessarily, because maybe the seller has a different requirements or different objectives. Maybe he's just in need of funds and that's why he's selling the business, or maybe he wants to move out, or he don't want to be involved for a longer term. So seller not agreeing to the seller financing not necessarily means it's a bad deal. Next type of the deal making or a deal structuring is basically earn-out structure. So what are the earn-outs? Earn-outs are basically the performance-based timely payments to the seller, which means the seller receives a chunk of the payment today, and any additional payment he will receive over the period of time with the triggers, like if the business performs so and so. So for example, if you are putting a down payment of a $200,000 on a deal, and you agree with the seller that you're gonna pay him, let's say 100 grand more the moment business hits another, let's say 200 grand profit, then you're gonna pay 100 grand more over the period, let's say next 6 months or 12 months, if the business meets certain percentage or a certain amount of revenue over the certain period of time. So why this works? Because as a buyer, it protects your interest and risk, because you're gonna only pay that amount once the business reaches to a certain milestone. So if the business makes an X, you're gonna pay a certain amount to the seller. And why does it work for the sellers? Because sellers are getting additional incentives, because they are getting additional money on top of the overall deal because the business performed well or as expected. And the last common method is, of course, the traditional, conventional, the financing, which you can go through the SBAs, you can go through the equipment financing kind of deals, you can go with the business financing from the different credit lenders. So those are traditional, based on your personal credits, based on your history with the banks, with the length of your credit. So even most of let's say if you talk about the SBAs also, so you're gonna pay like a 20% down payment, and then the balance 80% gets financed from the SBA. So there are different ways how you structure the deal whenever it comes to your business acquisition. But whichever the way you decide and agree, remember, as I told you, never ever put all of your money, all of your budget on the table in the down payment just to acquire the business, because working capital or operating capital planning is a crucial part. That is the only solid reason why most of the acquisitions fail. So you need to make sure that you have an ample amount of money sitting in your bank account, which will cover for your operating expenses in terms of your taking overs, your lease deposits, your signage, your change of the registers, your change of branding, your materials, your inventory, your rebranding tools, your marketing tools, paying salaries, pay utilities, paying the rent. So those all kind of expenses you're gonna pay from your operating capital. So make sure that you have a sufficient amount of operating capital. So if you are considering in making your first deal or making your first investments or buying or starting a business, and you are still not sure about how to structure your deal, how to negotiate with the seller, or if you are planning to start a new business, then how you gonna do the new business structuring and making the right investment choice, then feel free to reach out to me. Me and my team would be happy to address all of your concerns, and we will be happy to make sure that you get your deal with the lowest possible risk exposed. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.